the public, almost all of his key advisors told him it was a bad idea. And this includes people like Marco Rubio and John Ratcliffe, who are very pro-Israel and both very hawkish. And with regard to General Kane, who's the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and who President Trump appointed to that position, Kane told him that he had serious doubts it would work. And Kane, from the get-go, was telling Trump that we had significant limits on what we could do because of the munitions problem. So Trump was told by his principal advisors, maybe not Hexet, but Rubio, Vance, Ratcliffe, and General Kane, all of them had serious doubts, if not opposition, to this enterprise. But President Trump decided to listen to Netanyahu and Barnea and attack on February 28th. And as his principal advisors understood, it was destined to fail.
Yeah, but are you both being unduly pessimistic here? Walter Russell Mead, who writes a column in the Wall Street Journal, he argues, he takes a different view to both of you. He says that Trump's blend of unconventional diplomacy, tactical flexibility, they're his words, that's allowed Trump to pause the campaign without treating it as a strategic defeat. It's merely just another move in a longer contest. And time is on Trump's side, according to the neocons, because Iran is reeling from a massive cost of living crisis. Inflation is sky high. Your response to the more optimistic account of this war, Paul?
I understand the argument has got, I think, shreds of credibility here and there, but overall, I don't buy the argument, and I don't think the evidence stands up. I mean, if you look at the way Trump has conducted this war, I don't think there's any sense of a strategic acumen at all. I mean, the fact that he's chopped and changed so much indicates to me Trump's sense of desperation, his sense of a lack of strategy, not a flexible strategy. I think he's not on top of the issue. He hasn't formulated a way to get out. Now, look, I understand that the Iranian people are going through a process of a tremendous amount of pain at the moment. Mm-hmm. There's no doubt about that. And we know that the Revolutionary Guard, we know the people currently in command, believe that they've got sufficient domestic clout to be able to continue the war against the United States. Is Iran overestimating its strength? Well, maybe, we'll have to see. But I think that would be a gamble at this stage in terms of Trump's calculations. So I'm still inclined to think that time is not on the side of President Trump. And we'll have to see how this plays out. But I think the pressures on Trump for an exit strategy are pretty severe at the moment. And I think while the pressures on both sides are very different, I would imagine that the pressures on Trump, given the democratic polity of the United States, are greater.
Okay, well, last week, John, I spoke with our friend Trita Parsi from the Quincy Responsible Statecraft, and he conceded that there was a danger here, that the Iranians may well be overplaying their hand. And on that note, again, this is Walter Russell Mead, I'll put the quote to you, Iran has problems. It is fighting in the Gulf because it has lost the ability to fight from Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, and even to some degree from Iraq. Assets and relationships cultivated over decades have been torched. And the longer the conflict lasts, the weaker Iran's regional networks are likely to become. And while the regime's internal opponents seem unlikely to rise up in protest, Iran can't indefinitely function as a society without economic relief. Walter Russell Mead in the Wall Street Journal. John.
Well, the bigger is that Iran has problems, and that's correct. Iran has problems. There's no way any country fighting a war, whether you are the United States in World War II, the Soviet Union in World War II, Britain in World War II, that you're not going to have some problems. And there's no way that you're going to avoid significant suffering. It just comes with the territory. The question you have to ask yourself is, do you think there's any serious evidence that these problems are pushing the Iranians to throw up their hands and surrender? I would submit that there is zero evidence of that. I don't know anybody who can point to any evidence that these problems, and let's grant what he says, that there are problems, that these problems are having consequences that might lead Iran to surrender. Two other points. One is, when the United States and Israel punish Iran the way they are punishing Iran since February 28th, and in fact, before February 28th, it actually has a rally around the flag effect. You want to remember that President Trump talks about dealing with Iran in genocidal terms. And when you talk about dealing with Iran in genocidal terms, when you talk about putting them back in the Stone Age, that's going to cause Iranians to rally around the flag, which cuts against the Walter Russell Mead line of argument. Second point I'd make to you is that we have a rich history of countries being pummeled by their adversaries and huge numbers of people dying in those countries. Japan in World War II, Germany in World War II, North Korea during the Korean War, Vietnam, and so forth and so on. And in every one of those cases, the countries did not surrender because the population was being pummeled or being punished or was being deprived. People are willing to suffer, especially when they think they face an existential threat. And the Iranians believe they face an existential threat. Again, listen to President Trump's rhetoric. He presents the United States and Israel as an existential threat to Iran. He's going to bomb them back to the Stone Age. In a situation like that, I just don't think the fact that a country like Iran suffers as much as it does suffer is going to matter very much in terms of causing it to throw its hands up and surrender.
Yeah. In the aftermath of the September 11 terror attacks, you wrote a lot about the global war on terror and how President George W. Bush and his war on Iraq cost America dearly in terms of prestige, credibility, blood and treasure, but also influence and legitimacy. To what extent has President Trump's war on Iran further damaged America's reputation in the world, especially for US allies? Paul?
Well, I think it certainly had an effect, Tom. You are correct that I criticised President George W. Bush's invasion of Iraq, the objectives in Iraq, and that...
And by the way, did John Mearsheimer, but just to clarify, yep.
Sure. There's no doubt that damaged the United States strategically. And I think that the overall response to the 9/11 attacks was a very flawed response when it came to the United States. Having said that, though, and recognising that Donald Trump has still got a couple of years to go as president, I'm inclined to think the damage being done by Donald Trump is actually greater, because I think there are a couple of relevant points to make. One is America's global position was much stronger 25 years ago than it is today. The challenge from China was much less significant 25 years ago than it is today. The global order is much more dangerous, much more disruptive today than it was 25 years ago. And what we've seen with Donald Trump, I think, is a very defective response to all this. Trump has shown a contempt for allies. He's really been absolutely contemptuous of allies. And the point about this, of course, is that traditionally allies, while they haven't done enough, but allies have been a source of strength for the United States, and particularly at the present time. I mean, look at what happened in Iran. I mean, he just launched this war without bothering to tell any of the allies. They just didn't matter. He wasn't thinking about that. Yeah. So I think Trump's done a lot of harm when it comes to American allied relationships. I think he's undermined the concept of American strategic leadership in the world in terms of what he's done with economic policy and tariffs on the one hand, and the inconsistency of that when it comes to America's strategic interests on the other hand. I think that other world leaders see him as inconsistent, as unpredictable, as unreliable, as someone that they can't rely on. Certainly America's traditional allies, the presidents and prime ministers that he deals with, who are America's allies in private, are very, very concerned about Trump's reliability. So again, that's a strong negative. But perhaps the most important problem of all is the one I mentioned earlier on, and that is he's undermined the concept of strategic deterrence. In fact, I don't know if he even believes in it, because when it comes to what he says about East Asia and China, there's almost no discussion ever out of Trump's mouth about a strategy of strategic deterrence vis-a-vis China, in particular when it comes to Taiwan. I mean, what the United States has got to do is show that it is prepared to wage an effective defence of Taiwan if it is to persuade China that America is committed to a strategy of effective deterrence. And I think increasingly a lot of people are going to feel that Trump doesn't have such a commitment, that the United States is not really in a position where it is prepared to offer effective deterrence against China when it comes to Taiwan. And to the extent that this becomes apparent or is revealed in some way or other, this is going to have an enormous destabilising effect across the entire East Asian region. So I'm a critic of what Trump has done so far, and I'm very apprehensive about what Trump might do in the next couple of years.
And the law remains tied down in the Middle East, John. That inevitably weakens the deterrence against China, the subject of your upcoming book. John.
No, I think there's no question that. I mean, I agree with everything that Paul said. And I would just add to that Trump has 2 more years left. He's 80 years old, and there's all sorts of evidence that his cognitive faculties are not what they once were. And when you marry that to the fact that he's flailing, that he is in a situation where he's likely to suffer, very likely to suffer a humiliating defeat, one would think that his behavior is only going to get worse with the passage of time. It's not going to get better. So I think that the United States is in a lot of trouble, and for all the reasons that Paul laid out, our allies are in deep trouble. You know, Henry Kissinger used to joke or say tongue-in-cheek that the United States treats its allies worse than it treats its adversaries. I think historically that's not been true, and I think we all understand what Kissinger was getting at. Nevertheless, I think one could argue when it comes to Trump, treat our allies worse adversaries. And what's really bizarre about it is he takes a certain satisfaction in that. I think he likes slapping our allies around because he knows our allies depend heavily on us for their security. And therefore, he's in a position where he can slap them around and get away with it. But as Paul said, this is disastrous.
Yeah, but notwithstanding your points, both of you, is there a danger where we're being too pessimistic about the United States? It is the most powerful nation militarily and economically on the planet. I mean, the greenback is still the world's reserve currency. America's higher education system, despite its flaws, is nevertheless a global trendsetter. People around the world flock to America to be educated in America. And, you know, America is now, for the first time in generations, energy independent. The Western Hemisphere produces more oil than the Middle East did before the crisis. Doesn't all of this leave Beijing especially exposed to a prolonged regional conflict? Paul?
Well, the point I was just making, Tom, and the point I think John was just making concerned the leadership of President Trump.
Sure.
A separate is the reality of American power vis-a-vis China. One of the points I'd make here is that there are a lot of really serious internal economic problems in China. And it's easy for us to overlook the difficulties that China faces in terms of demography, in terms of its financial system, in terms of its economic growth. These are enormous difficulties, and of course we need to bear in mind that the absolute priority, the absolute objective of the Communist Party is to retain control, is to retain power in China. So I think we need to be alert to all that. I'm not necessarily an advocate of the idea of American decline. I think that America has enormous reserves here of energy, of economic opportunity, of economic strength, of technological capability. And I think it's often too easy to talk about American decline. However, I think there is a difficulty at the moment with the American political system, with the quality of leadership we're getting from the United States, with what's happening with both the Republican Party under Trump and what's happening with the Democratic Party as well. So I'm concerned about the future course of American politics and American internal unity. But I'm certainly not one who is putting the United States on some sort of trajectory of inevitable decline.
Mm-hmm. Fareed Zakaria, John, the Washington Post columnist who airs a program on CNN, whom you know, he says that this war has integrated three long-term Chinese objectives. The first, a Middle East less dependent on the United States. Second, a world more reliant on Chinese technology. And three, a stronger reputation for Beijing as a stable global power. Is that argument persuasive to you, John?
I think there's no question. First point that our influence in the Middle East is going to decrease as a result of this war. Our basing structure in the Gulf, our alliance structure in the Gulf are badly damaged. And it's quite clear that we're not going to be able to have as much influence in the Middle East moving forward as we had before February 28th. I think there's no question about that. On the third point that Fareed makes about our influence around the world, our reputation, our soft power, as we were talking about 5 minutes ago, there's no question we've done enormous damage. And to use Robert Zoellick's famous terminology about a responsible stakeholder, the United States certainly does not look like a responsible stakeholder, as I think all three of us could agree. And the fact is, the Chinese do look like responsible stakeholders, whether you like their political system or not. They look like they are acting in a rational, legal way. So I think on those two dimensions, Fareed is right. His second point had to do with power. My view on power.
We're more reliant on Chinese technology.
Okay, on Chinese technology. Look, there is no question that the Chinese are fully capable of giving us a run for our money when it comes to developing sophisticated technologies. And if you ask me who's going to win that arms race over the next 20 years, if I was being honest with you, I'd say I really don't know. And I really don't want to bet against the Chinese. As an American, I hope we win that technology race hands down. But again, I don't know. The Chinese are truly impressive when it comes to their ability to develop sophisticated technologies like AI, quantum computing, 5G, and so forth and so on. And it may be the case that they best us in that race in the years to come.
Paul, just final thoughts, but I mean, I should just stress for our international audience, you are one of Australia's leading commentators. You've also been a big defender of this AUKUS agreement with the United States and Britain, the nuclear submarine deal, designed to keep in check a rising China. John, Paul, you hear John talking about America no longer being a responsible stakeholder, to use Bob Zoellick's words. If indeed that is the case, What is all talking about today? What does all this mean for US allies in the region, whether they're Australia, Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, but even like Indonesia and Singapore, who are genuinely anxious about China's rise? What does all this mean for our region? Paul?
Well, what it means for our region, Tom, is pretty clear. Our region at the moment is facing a tremendous challenge from the rise of China, from China's aggressive tactics, from every sign that China aspires to be a regional hegemon, that it is prepared to seduce, bribe and intimidate countries within the region. Australia has experienced this firsthand over the course of the last several years with this extraordinary campaign of blatant and brutal trade coercion which China launched against Australia in order to break the will and break the strategic commitment and political will of the Australian government at the time, led by Scott Morrison.
This is wolf diplomacy. Go on, Paul.
So I think the first answer to your question is to set the stage in the region. Now, of course, we've got a situation where politicians on both sides in Australia and many politicians in the region are enormously concerned about Donald Trump. But there's only one United States, and America is the only country in the world that can offer a sense of strategic deterrence vis-a-vis China in East Asia. So the reality is, regardless of all the problems of the United States, regardless of all the difficulties with hard and soft power, American reality is still there. America has been an ambitious Pacific power for much of its history. I don't think it's going to walk away from it. So I think the situation is, when it comes to allies like Japan and Australia, there's a recognition that we have to do more, we have to be more self-reliant, but what we're aspiring to do is to increase our self-reliance within the framework of the alliance with the United States and try to continue to make that work. We recognise that there will be an ongoing Trump legacy after Trump leaves the presidency. It's folly to think that there won't be an enduring Trump legacy in terms of the way the United States thinks, but there will be a new American government, there will be a new American president, and I think the United States will remain with its strategic interests, with its strategic economic and strategic interests in East Asia. And I think the nature of these alliance relationships will in fact continue. They'll be redefined, they'll change in many ways. But the reality for a country like Australia, as far as I'm concerned, is we have no other option but continue to work within the framework of the American alliance.
Paul, John, to be continued. It's great to see you both. Thanks so much for being on the program.
Tom, I'd just like to say it's been a real privilege to be on the program with John. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. John?
I feel the same way about being on the program with the two of you, and I look forward to doing it again. And hopefully we'll have a happier subject to talk about.